Hi, everyone, and welcome to another session of Working in UX Design. And today we have a special guest with us. Her name is Tara Hirebet, and she has been a friend for a very, very long time. And she has just returned from the US to Singapore after working for Google, right? Google, and I'm sure all of us use Google products. And then we're going to get her to talk a little bit about Google Maps, Google Search, which she is part of the team back in Palo Alto in California. So we're going to hear about her experience being a Googler over there and being in Silicon Valley, where there's so much going on right now, especially in the age of Gen AI. And we'll also be exploring how she applies systems thinking to create sustainable teams and build sustainable teams, and also how we're moving from the hype cycle to preservation transformation. So I'll get her to explain a little bit more about that later. And we'll be comparing some notes with Silicon Valley and Southeast Asia, how she builds, because Tara, for your information, did not just work in Silicon Valley, but she also worked for a company known as GoJek, and she was a pretty senior design leader over there, as well as senior research and design leader. So we're going to get her perspective comparing both Southeast Asia as well as Silicon Valley. And last of all, she's also very kind to be sharing some of the tips in case any one of us, especially those of you who are Singaporeans, any one of us who would like to work in the US, it's actually a lot easier than you think. So we'll be getting her to share some of those tips and her experiences. I'm delighted to welcome you to our show, Tara. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling very good. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you having me. So thanks. Thanks a lot for the opportunity.
Awesome. And we have an audience here of a very, very international audience from Germany to
Oh,
Japan to Singapore and Malaysia. So thank you everyone for joining us, and feel free to share your questions in chat. We'll be also answering them. So let me just kind of start off and tell me more about your experience working in Google. I mean, that's kind of like where we started off. Is it as good as they share in the movies, The Intern, and where like a couple of guys went to Google to be interns and all that stuff. So yeah, just trying to understand, is the movie portrayal even accurate, or maybe it's even better than that in real
sure.
life? Yeah.
I definitely think Google has changed. I'm going to be honest with you. I think the stuff that you see in the movies about like what Google used to be like and the stuff that gets published a lot is a lot more what they used to be like, I think. And also lots of credit to Laszlo Block, who used to be the head of HR there, who created a lot of that. I think Google is, it's a huge organization. And it's very much like any huge organization. It really depends on the team that you're on. It depends on your manager. It depends on the product that you're working on. So it's super variant. So I was on three different teams there. I was on the Next Billion Users team. I worked on Google Maps and I worked on Google Search. And I would say like all of those organizations had very different kind of work cultures and ways of doing things. And they were also established at different times as well. So some of it is there. Yes, definitely. There's all the free cafes that are amazing. There's free food, there's free snacks, there's like massages, like all that stuff that you read about. It's very true. Get a lot out of Google. I do know that they've pared back on some of those things a little bit now, as part of cost cutting, but I mean, they still have most of those things there. Um, you do have beautiful offices. I had the privilege of working out of the Mountain View and the Sunnyvale offices, and the San Francisco office is very beautiful downtown. So you get a lot of privileges. They have a real barista making your coffee if you want it. So there is a lot of that for sure. At the same time, it's also just an organization full of like A gamers and alpha types. And so there's a lot of competition. And it can be really tough as well, right? It's like a tough environment to shine in. People are trying really hard to always overperform. So I think it's like any place. It's got its like pros and cons, and it is a huge organization. It's a huge global organization. It's not a startup anymore. It's a big technology company. So there like different aspects to it. But definitely
Yeah.
you learn a lot. Whatever I think whatever you do, you learn. So I learned a lot.
Yeah, I think more than the benefits, which I'm sure it's a part of the the package and overall experience. It's actually the impact, right?
Yeah.
The fact that you're working on products that are used by billions of people
Yeah, for sure.
in the world. And yeah, how does it feel? I mean, moving from, I know your last role before Google was GoJek, right? Moving from just working regionally all the
Mhm.
way to like global. What sort of like you're sensing in terms of like the difference, like in terms of skill, what do you need to pay attention to?
Sure. I really believe that I don't, like when I got to Google and I thought like, okay, I'm working, I had the privilege of first moving to like a next billion users team, which was sort of like still covered Southeast Asia, but it's almost like what they called next billion markets globally. So that was still Latin America, Africa, Asia. So it's almost like scaling what you would do regionally here to like all sorts of different other markets that might have some aspects that are similar to them. Some are not, obviously. Um, so I found that was really interesting because there were lots of lessons that you could apply, and that I felt that I could apply from GoJek. And indeed, like, let's be really like that's how the Next Billion Users team hired me, is because they felt like I, spent time at GoJek, spent time in the Asian market, and I had a lot of lessons I could apply, or they wouldn't have hired me. So, I think there's like aspects of it, like when you look at anything from infrastructure in different countries to financial literacy to device usage and the kinds of devices people use to like sort of average income or gaps between different incomes, like all of those aspects actually exist all over the world. And I would also argue that, we tend to, or maybe even what you want to call like, I don't like the word Western, Eastern, but, like companies in those areas, you tend to kind of think that, they lump together all of these different people. But the reality is like, there's also a lot of demographics that show that there's what they call the bottom of the developed pyramid, so to speak, right? So there are places in America that don't have great internet access, where people don't have great as high literacy levels, that don't have great data connections. So, it's not like the learnings that you have from these markets are entirely non-applicable in a huge place like the United States either. It's just that we tend to separate all of these things, So I definitely think that, there were lessons to apply in all those sort of aspects. I think there are also lessons to apply in terms of like, all of those places when you're confronted with very complex problems, you have to find interesting and creative ways to do your research, to do your design, to have like workarounds, to solve problems. So I think all of those things are readily applicable as well.
Yeah, thanks for giving an overview of this. I once heard, so had a chat with someone from Netflix who used to work as a research manager at Netflix, and they told me they had unlimited research budget as long as they get to the outcome and objective. I'm just kind of wondering how does Google structure its research, and how do you all approach, the problems that you want to solve in order to before you launch a product? Yeah.
Sure. I would say that, like when I work there, I really think that, so one of the things is, I think there's a tendency to think that when you work in a very large company that they have endless amounts of budget. Yeah, Google had a lot of budget, but to be really, really honest, I actually spent like, I spent more money doing research at GoJek than I actually got at Google. I found it a lot harder to get the budget that I wanted at Google. And in fact, like GoJek signed off on a budget that took me 1 year to get signed off at Google, to give you an idea. So I think this is like idea of like, endless pots of cash. Like maybe Netflix has that, but I think it's really variant. I think the other thing is it also depends where you come from. I think like, being in GoJek, to be really honest, and being in other places where I really had to fight for budget and fight to like, even get my team started or whatever else it was, taught me to be more frugal and taught me to be smart about the cash that I have and what I do with it and the time that I have. And so I think I brought that mindset to Google. So even though Google might have been a little bit more easygoing, and honestly, the Next Billion Users team was fantastic. It probably had a pretty, I wouldn't say unlimited budget, but they really would spend on research. And I didn't even have to care. I just get everything signed off on. But even when I had that privilege, I found that, having that startup mindset made me very thoughtful about what I do. Like every project I had, I would scope it to the level that I thought it should be. And then, I would say like vendors tend to also overcharge big tech, to be really honest. Like I saw like some of the budgets I don't like, it wasn't even Google's fault. I say like, the contracts I signed because of who they are much higher. But I would just say that, I just scope it to what I thought was right. I would find actually the frugal workarounds. Sometimes like I find frugal workarounds and it would be others being like, why are you doing this? It's not it's not a startup money. You're not a startup anymore. But I think it's smart to have that mindset overall, pretend you're on a shoestring budget and what can you do with it? because I feel that you can take that anywhere that you go. Whereas if you just get used to huge budgets and blowing things up, like you're just never gonna manage if you go to a place that doesn't have anything. You want to know what to do with it. And I do think that that is one of the dangers, if I had to give, of like working in a big company in a big tech, is that you get very used to, I've heard this, I've heard from other people who tell me that they'll hire Google engineers sometimes or hire others that are very used to, Google has so many tools already ready that a lot of times you can use a tool, or you can, or even research wise, right? I could go out and be like, I need to do research on this, and 50 other researchers will send me stuff that they've already done. And then I just have to build off of that, And in engineering, it's the same. 50 other people might have slices of code that are already ready made, and then you have to just build off of that. But what happens is then when you go from that environment to something where you have to start from scratch, you don't know how to do that anymore. So I think it's, you always want to keep yourself a little bit nimble and not get used to things like that, because otherwise you're just not going to be hireable somewhere else.
Yeah, I really, really love that spirit. And I think I'm glad you're back in Singapore and actually doing work here in Southeast Asia. I'm excited to see what's next for you. And also just wondering, like, you've worked at Google for more than 5 years. You work on different things like maps, you work on things that are 0 to 1. Just wondering what's the work that you're most proud of um, back at
Sure.
Google?
Um, hmm. It's tough, like lots of different things, I guess. I think like what I'm proud of is that I would say that, something that I kept up with, and I think that um I've always had that. Like I'm a real believer that your job, your your CV and everything else should interest you. I used to always like make a joke that I was like, I want my CV to be something interesting to read for a recruiter and not for them to think like, oh, I've seen this before. So it should be interesting enough that I want to read my own CV, And I have that same attitude to research, which is, research has X number of methodologies. I have like focus groups, they have your like surveys, I have whatever. And I'm like, but why, right? Like, it doesn't mean that those are the only finite number of things that you have to actually solve a problem. So I would say something that I am proud of is that even in a place like Google, where to be really honest, like, I definitely, it's very common that you get a certain set of methodologies that everybody uses again and again, like diary studies, focus groups, usability testing, like this gamut of like, sort of approaches that tend to be tried and tested in tech. But I'm proud of the fact that like even in a place like Google towards the end, even when it was really tough to get budget for research, when, AI was kind of taking over and they were doing a lot of cost cutting, there was layoffs and everything else. I think I was the last person on the team to secure like a pretty significant budget to proactively do Gen Z research. Like actually pitched that I was like, we're losing money. I was on the food and restaurant team on Google search, and it was very evident. And even our leads were saying we're losing money to TikTok and Instagram. And my attitude was like, instead of losing money, let's figure out what we're losing it to. And so I wanted to do a Gen Z study, and I didn't want to work with any of the vendors we already had. So I decided to be even more difficult and have to like, I had a friend of mine, I'm going to totally shout him out, Untap.work, George. He's great. And he has an amazing model. He actually takes Gen Z, he trains them to be researchers, and he gets them to interview their peers. So there's no adult ever in the room. And I found that powerful because I felt like that's when you get the real insights, right? Like when you're not like doing the typical research. I got him onboarded. We did this great study where we just had Gen Z going, like at that time it was, we were fused with the travel team. So it was actually going out. So literally like how do Gen Z go out from like looking up their food, their restaurants, their places to party to whatever else? How do they do their search? Where do they do their search? And I made it agnostic. I didn't make it about Google. I made it like, I want you to just use whatever platforms you usually use. And the first study I did before that, I actually did a diary study and I told them I made everybody do selfie videos. And that was like unheard of. And people like, that's so much, why would you do that? That's inefficient. That's so much data gathering. Like you have to do so much work. And it was a lot of work. Everything was audio files, social media posts, selfie videos, but it hadn't been done before. And the quality of the insights were fabulous, They're really natural because there was nobody watching them. And in the second study where there were peers being interviewed, it was the same thing. And the agency was really edgy. And they literally could get like trendsetters that, like work with hip hop artists, like, so we got like the quality of information was amazing. So I really feel like I'm proud of those things because I feel like they were like really weird. Like, I think that was one of them. I think on another one, like when we were doing mobility, I like pitched that we just go on rides with people. So we did crazy stuff. Like we went to India And I just sit in the thing and be like, can I ride with you and ask you if your rideshare experience is okay? And we did like 50 of those rides all over India. We did food delivery research, and I wanted the team to understand what that's like. So we went with food delivery drivers as part of Swiggy when we were doing a workshop with them, and we just sat on the back of the motorbikes and did research. We went to slums, we did like lots of different things, and I give Google credit for letting me do that. They could have just said no. But I think like, what I'm proud of is I think that, I could just get really bored and I could have just done the tried and tested stuff, but I don't want to bore myself, I suppose. Selfish as that may be.
I think the team is very consistent here because you said resourcefulness, and I can see a display of resourcefulness over here, because I never heard of anyone doing research like that, like getting Gen Zs to interview Gen Zs. I thought that's brilliant. And I'm very curious, but I'm sure it's a confidential report that's
I can't share any of the insights, sadly, and I don't own them anymore anyway.
With the Google management team. But it's really, really interesting. I think there's so much that you have done, and I'm going to ask you a question. Like with our industry evolving, right? You see a lot of tech layoffs. You see people cutting research teams. You see people using AI to just do like proto personas and all that stuff. And everything is, all of these practices are very, very debatable, right? Like the value of the researcher or a user researcher is now in question. In fact, even as we work with corporate clients in training, where we're being asked to train the user research team to be product designers, right? So I'm very curious, like, is there still a place for researchers in product teams moving forward? Yeah.
Sure. I'm going to be dead honest with you, which is that like I decided sometime last year, like this is just not the right path anymore. I didn't really look for jobs in research, as crazy as that sounds. Like I didn't look for jobs in research. I started to pivot myself and look at like chief of staff or this or that or other things, because I really did feel that research role is like sort of dying a little bit. And I'm going to be honest, I was never like a typical researcher. Like a lot of the stuff that I do, it's because I don't view myself as just a UX researcher or researcher, to be super transparent. So I do think that, realistically, I think if you are a researcher, you should have other tools in your toolbox, and you shouldn't be like so hell-bent that I can only do UX research. It doesn't mean those jobs don't exist. They exist. So I'm not saying don't go down that path. I think it's like a few different things, right? I think like one part is that I am a firm believer that, you make yourself useful because you're a product development team. And everyone has a set of tools and a toolkit in order to be able to product develop, So UX research is just one toolkit. And the reason products work is because you have a multidisciplinary team where you've got design, you've got research, you've got an engineer, and you've got a product manager. Those are all just toolkits, but everybody is developing product. I think what becomes important for a researcher is like, having some skin in the game. So I think a lot of times what happens with research is we're seen as replaceable, because the idea is like, I can just use an AI agent to do that research for me online. I can get it to do the analysis. I can now get it to do the interviewing. I can even create the avatars to the focus groups. I can do all that stuff. Why do I need you, right? And the truth is there's like two parts to it. One is that if you are just going to be a researcher that does research and creates like the insights and then hands over the insights to somebody else to make the decisions, like the product manager, you are making yourself very replaceable very quickly, right? And for researchers, I think the way to do it is like get close to your product managers, get close to your engineers, become that like three in a pod that they call three in a box, right? Like that pod team. And the idea is you're all developing the product together. You have skin in the game. Like if let's say something goes wrong with the product, it's equally maybe your fault for not finding out the right insight. Or you found an insight and that insight is no longer relevant. So make your product manager and your engineer feel that, hey, I have as much skin in the game as you. If something goes wrong, maybe my insight was wrong and I need to solve the problem with you. And so like I think that's really important. I think the other part is this part, like what can AI not do? There's a reality that, yes, it's very true. AI can do the analysis, the reporting, the whatever else it is. Like I don't think AI can do, and I'm not saying that in an obnoxious way, AI probably wouldn't have come up with any of the research methods that I came up with. right? And it didn't come up with those research methods because they're creative and they're like a little bit different. And it's because I went out of my way. I was trying to find net new insights. I was like, I wonder if they're there. It's an experiment. So that's the other part. You have the ability to be creative, imaginative, to actually experiment and see if you can come up with something that's really different, you know? And I think that's how you separate yourself out, is that you're a creative problem solver. And just to kind of put that out there, when I set up the research team in GoJek, like actually people didn't really know exactly what a research team necessarily does, you know? And I was like, that's actually great that nobody actually knows what the research team does. So instead of being like, we're researchers, I was like, we're creative problem solvers. If let's say you can't solve a problem or your team hasn't been able to solve a problem, come to my team. That's actually how I positioned us. And what happened, to be very honest, is that we got a lot of projects that most people would never give a researcher. We work with a fraud team and we help to look at how we could uncover fraud. We actually worked on 2 different fraud projects, one from the co-founder and someone else. No one brings in research to do fraud. At one point, I remember we worked with data science and we were giving them ideas of what they could put in their ML models for like financial literacy and for like, you know, the way they were categorizing merchants. And they were like, oh, these are interesting signals that I never thought of, you know? So it was the fact that we allowed ourselves to go to solve problems that may not have been given to a traditional research team, you know? So I think like it's really about how do you make, it's like anyone will tell you with any job, how do you make yourself irreplaceable? You know, AI can only replace so much, right? AI can't go out and fix your kitchen sink, as they're saying nowadays, right? Manufacturing, plumbing, whatever. AI can't replace you if your value is in the way that you solve a problem versus the way that you do a really great looking report.
Mm. Wow. Lots of really great nuggets of advice, and I think my biggest takeaway from what you just said is like creative problem solving. Make that and own that and be really, really good at that.
Yeah,
And it's so interesting to hear that you actually frame the entire research team as a SWAT team for problem solving. So it's like
exactly. That's
everyone just
literally what it
comes.
was. Yeah, we literally said that. I was
Yeah,
like, we're a SWAT team. We'll come in and we'll solve your problem. If you can't solve the problem,
yeah,
give me a go. Give my team a go.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I think that's really, really powerful because I've read several books about how PayPal solved their initial fraud problems. And I know they were very insights driven because they knew how deviants behave, right? Like people who
Yeah.
actually commit fraud behave.
Yeah.
And that's human, right?
Yes.
That's not a that's not
Yeah.
specifically anything else.
Yeah.
So because they understood that so well, they were able to actually come up with countermeasures to reduce fraud. So wow, this is really fascinating.
I'd say just
Yeah.
you use the tools that you have and you just find a different path, right? Like, and honestly, I think like, you know, I will give a lot of like credit to, I have a career coach that I'm working with at the moment. I will give her a shout out to Mino Mehta. She's
Of
awesome.
course.
But like, you know, I think that, you know, she taught me something that even I forgot a little bit and she's made me relearn, which is to have an experimentation mindset. That's really hard because especially when you're talking about what you talked about, right? We're worried about layoffs. We feel threatened all the time. We're worried about our jobs. We're all overworking. It's very difficult to actually be creative and innovative. We know, like everyone's talking about, like, how are you going to be creative and innovative in a layoff environment anymore? You know, like, but the truth is, that is the time to double down and be creative and innovative and set yourself apart and experiment in a certain way, right? Like the more that you are somebody who's able to experiment and try and do different things, the more you do set yourself apart from other people because you're likely suggesting things that other people are not and are kind of just putting their heads down and doing that stuff.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm just glad I'm able to have this chat with you and just really dig deep on it. I understand you're also really passionate about, systems thinking and sustainability and going from hype to actually, more sustainable business models, more and something that you call preservation transformation. Can you help me unpack that a little bit? What do you mean by preservation transformation?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I would just say like I guess the when I say like system stuff, it's more the idea of like I think we've gotten into like and I think that's part of the creative problem solving, you know, that I would say is that I think what's happened is that we tend to look at things very much in silo. right? And what happens is like an example, right? Like if we're product developing, well, like we're developing a product. That's it, but you look at the way that certain things have developed. You look at WeChat and how it became huge. It wasn't a product, it was an ecosystem, right? You look at what Google actually is. It's an ecosystem. They're like closed wall ecosystems or entire OSs, if you want to look at it, operating systems unto themselves, right? And that's why they sort of work. Or that's why even like if you'll hear 50,000 people complaining about Facebook and Facebook dying and all sorts of stuff, it's still here. You know what I mean? It's not dead. And instead, like Instagram has taken off and whatever, So the way I would look at it is that the reason being that it's much easier to let go of a product. Like I can decide today I don't like this toothpaste and I want to get a different toothpaste. But if you told me, hey, Tara, I don't want you to ever use another product from Method or Unilever or P&G for like the next 6 months, that would take me a little bit of effort because they're like ecosystems where they own like 50,000 products. And I'd have to look at every product that I use and decide that I am not engaging with the whole ecosystem. If you told me, if I decided I don't want to use Gmail and I want to use like some indie email or whatever, that's great. But then it's like, no, you can't use maps, search, ads, like it would be a lot harder for me to do that. And that's human nature. It's harder to get somebody out of an ecosystem. So the reason I think systems thinking is powerful is because if you understand the system that somebody sits inside or the system that you're building and you try and build somebody into a system, it's very hard for them to leave a system. you know like that was the argument I remember about when I had worked at RGA. The thing that they taught you about was like Nike Fuel Band, right? Like Nike Fuel Band was the first time Nike stopped selling shoes and they sold a fuel band. Why is that sort of powerful? It's sort of powerful because like a shoe is a shoe. I can buy a Nike or an Adidas or whatever. Now my shoe connects to this band, and now like my band tells me like how much I'm walking or running or doing whatever. It's very hard for me to leave this ecosystem where that's giving me trophies and telling me how far I'm doing things and like, rewarding me. And like that's what Fitbit is. It's like that's what makes those things valuable, right? Like the Fitbit in itself is not what's motivating people. It's the whole ecosystem that the Fitbit is like getting you involved in, and that you can't let go of. So I think like systems building is important from that point of view. And I think we forget to look at things sort of that way. So I feel that like, it sounds like really weird, but it's like, like an example, other examples of that are sort of like city building, right? Like when we were working on Google Maps, I remember talking to people when we were looking at, obviously I was doing like the food in the restaurants with the team, and like, obviously COVID hit. And, I made a comment at some point saying that, it's interesting because if you look at Google Maps, I wouldn't know that we're living in COVID. Like, apart from the fact that it says there's some closures or permanently closed or temporarily closed or delivery only, I was like, isn't it weird that our map doesn't really reflect the reality of the world around? Because the world is dead and my map pretty much looks like everything is kicking about and fine, So then it becomes like, what is the responsibility of a map? Is it supposed to be a living atlas? Is it supposed to be an atlas? Is it a living, breathing representation of the real world around you? And like to what extent? And then, there's like, it sounds weird, but they're like existential maybe questions. But like if you look at a map, it can do two things. It can reflect the world around you, but you can decide what kind of a world it reflects around you based on the data. If I don't have enough data, let's say on restaurants in Chinatown or tiny little neighborhoods, it reflects a mass market world around me. And it prevents people from actually being able to interact with those smaller places. On the other hand, if I decide that I want to encourage people to be a lot better at being diverse and trying different places, maybe I over-index on like all these tiny neighborhood shops and mom and pop shops and whatever. And what would happen then to that map, right? Then it's suddenly like a map that's not just reflecting the world around me, it's directing me to be a better person in the world around me, maybe, and to try more things or be more diverse in my options. So that's what I mean by like systems thinking, is that there's an opportunity when you do systems thinking that you will think about bigger picture like situations and problems to solve from like a UX or a design sort of point of view,
Yeah.
And I feel like
So,
that's where we've forgotten a little bit how something
yeah.
sits in a larger context.
Yeah, I really love that. And I also want to comment like how different you are from maybe our interactions in the past when you were just working in Singapore. I know that was many, many years ago.
Yeah.
And it seems like the US have really, really open up this sort of like scale and systems approach towards things. I also want to maybe do a sense check. You know, I want to pull a thread over here. I know you
Yeah.
do some fractional consulting for startups. Is it practical to apply what you just said? Because it sounds like, hey, yeah, of course GoJek can do it. They have like so
Mm.
much cash. Of course Google can do it. They have so much cash. But is it practical for an SME or a smaller company to be able to like approach that? And do you have an example to share?
I think like, yeah, I think that the idea of systems thinking is to under like, there's a book that I read, like I love this book and I tell everybody about this book. There's a like, it's called Thinking in Systems. It's by Donella Meadows. It's a great book. If you want to read it, like I would say like a lot of stuff I'm saying I learned out of this book. And she has this great way of saying what is a system, what is not a system. She talks about, elements versus this, how something is into a function of purpose, the levers of a system. It's just a great book. And what I loved is what she said is that, she's like, everything is a system. So she says, even one human being is a system. You are a system made up of lots of miniature systems, So we don't think about those things like, so I would say like when I say that when you ask like, can an SME or somebody else do it? You can definitely do it because it's a point of view more on how you could view something and how it might expose you things for you to look at. So when you're looking at a user, we think a user is one person, 10,000 users are 10,000 people. 10,000 users are 10,000 systems made up of lots of different things going on, right? So if I'm a made up of lots of little systems, that means I'm made up of systems that have to do with my health, my neurology, my, my physical space and my interactions, the things I wear, there's a whole load of things that make up me as a system. So when you start to look at it that way, it's like, and you're offering products up, it's like you can start to think about how that thing fits into a larger space. The other way is that, I know like Fjord and I think it was like, was it Fjord? It was actually like I'm going to get one of these wrong and someone's going to kill me, but I think it was like the guy from Fjord or Frog, probably Frog, that he said this idea of living products, right? And his idea of living products and living was the idea that a product, if a human being is never static and they're constantly growing and evolving, if you make a good product, why would you make a static product? The product should also be living and growing and evolving with you. Otherwise, it's pretty natural that as a living, if this stays still and you keep evolving, you're probably going to let go of the product at some point because you're here and the product's back where you were before, right? So it's like that same kind of, that thought comes out of systems thinking. It's the idea that products should grow with you, and organic products, I think they had called it, So I think as an SME, you can think about things like that. I think it's
Yeah.
also how things fit into stuff, right? So for example, okay, like one thing I can give an example of, right? And this is not like from work experience as such. It is a little bit maybe, but like from just that systems thinking kind of a thing. People selling a phone, right? If you're selling like a phone, or if you're a phone manufacturer, I get that comes from like a big brand. But like, if you notice, like people sell individual phones. It's like, here's a new phone, here's a new phone, here's a new phone. It makes a lot of sense because you want people to replace their phones. But there's also a reality that you look at the way that markets develop things, right? So and technology in general, right? There's smartphones and there's like, so you've got an iPhone, and then if you notice, there's a cheaper range of iPhone, right? There's a Pixel, and I think like I should know this. But there's like either a cheaper range of Pixel they were thinking of
Yeah,
coming
that's
out with
like pro and
yeah,
non-pro.
there
Yeah,
you go.
all
Yeah,
that.
right, right. But if you notice that, oh, you look at Facebook and there's like there was Facebook Zero or whatever. What does that tell you though? Actually, what people are doing is taking premium products and they're dumbing them down for everybody. Now, if you're somebody who can't afford something, is that a sexy proposition for you? Here is a cheaper, crappier version of the great phone that I usually produce because you can't afford the really big thing. And then this way, hopefully you'll still aspire to get this really amazing phone, and who turned that on its head was Geo, right? You look at Reliance Geo. What did they do? They did not go, I'm going to like look at a very expensive phone and give you a cheap version of it. What Geo did is they developed in India a best in class, cheap as chips, highly affordable mass product, and it took off in India. They didn't do like, these are my expensive premium phone versions. They're like, how can I create an amazing phone at this price bracket that unlocks as much as possible for this market? That
Mm.
is a respectful way to develop a phone. Now, the other ways you could look at things are like, why do we even sell phones like that? What if phones were programs? If I want somebody to use, let's say, an iPhone for the rest of my life, why don't I develop a lower tier to like a higher tier iPhone? And instead of making it that they have to keep on buying phones, maybe I put them in a system like, the way you have solar panel subscription programs where I paid off slowly and I get it. Why not have a phone and I can tell you that, as you start to upgrade your life, you can upgrade your phone with me. You can keep trading it in and one day you get a smartphone. And then I'm locked into your system of buying iPhones for the rest of my life. That is systems thinking, right? It's the idea that how does something fit into like things, we always solve everything with a product, and sometimes it's about a program, it's about a subscription, it's about the way that you actually disseminate or distribute something out into the market, and I just feel that, that's where we're not always very thoughtful about the way things work. And you could even see how that would work beautifully, right? In terms of trading things in terms of recycling, in terms of like people would hand back their phones to you because you're going to upgrade them. Like there's so many things that come into play if you take into account more of a systems thinking kind of an approach. So I think it's more of a mindset as opposed to whether it's an SME or big tech or whatever else it is.
Yeah. So if I were to kind of like distill what you just said, and obviously I think you made a really great book recommendation. What for a product team, what's the one thing you think we should have in our process or start thinking about, right? In order to incorporate more systems thinking and whatever we're doing. Yeah.
I think that I guess it's more about like, looking at like, I guess like these are all economies of scale and like growth, practices and everything else. I think it's sort of the way I would look at it is that, what you want to do is like when you research something, there's a real tendency for us to just research the product rather than research everything that happens sort of around it. And by that, I mean like, for example, I don't know, if you're usually a company, like whether it's a Google or a GoJek or a small company or whatever, your first tendency is big, I'm going to research my users. If you research your users, it's important, but you're finding out about everybody who's already using your product, Then sometimes it's like, I'm going to research the competitors. And so then it becomes like competitive research. So again, it's like, I'm going to look at my product and then why everybody else is using these products instead. And then my argument would almost be like, what's the entire problem space that all your products kind of sit in that it's like actually supposed to solve? What is an adjacent problem space to that? What is the bigger picture of where all of that sits? I think some of it comes also from there's like basic design thinking, right? You're supposed to keep asking why till you get to the root cause. I think there's things like that too, right? Like an example is like I guess so I would say like one part of it is to like look at adjacent areas. Like, don't just think about everything in terms of your product, your user, your competitors, your whatever. Look at the universe of what that bigger thing is, right? Like, so for example, I can research Google Maps, I can research Bing, Apple Maps, and everything else, but I'm like, what's a map? Right? Like that's really what is a map? What's it supposed to do to begin with? What can it do?
Yeah.
What can it do?
Yeah. Yeah.
What else could it be? So it's like, there's like that higher level questioning that you could do. And the same thing, like if it's a phone, it's like, oh, it's like a lower tier phone, a higher tier phone, it's whatever, but it's like, why does this person even need a phone? What does it do for them beyond the fact that it's a phone? What does the access to the phone do to this person? And then when you assume that access improves things from education to livelihood to whatever, then you already know they're evolving and upgrading. So does the evolution or the upgrading of phone seem so crazy as a concept against that, with that idea of living products? So it's like, it's more like, like asking the really root cause, so to speak, of the question, the root cause of that problem statement that you're trying to solve for the product. What really is it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And someone in chat was asking the name of the book.
Oh, yes. It's called
Thinking in
Thinking
Systems,
in
right?
Systems. And Donella, Donella, and her last name is Meadows, Meadows.
Yeah.
You can even look
Yeah.
it up online, and there's actually there's some Florida state kind of thing where they've actually published it. There's a Donella Meadows
Nice.
project because she unfortunately passed away. And so there's a beautiful archive of all her essays that it's fantastic. There's one called Dancing with Systems. That's how I got exposed to it. Read Dancing with Systems. It's such a
Wow.
great little PDF.
Sounds amazing. Lovely. And I would really want to spend a bit of time as well on your perspective on product thinking,
Sure.
right? Because you've spoken quite a fair bit about systems thinking. I know personally, I mean, having worked in Razer before, the mindset is very global.
Mhm.
And I know it's different when you're working on a global product versus like a regional or even like a local, just for in-country type of product. And I may ask you to make some very some comparisons from your perspective, having worked in the Valley and having worked in Southeast Asia for a long time. Um, what do you think is different about the teams or you know the mindset of the people who are building products in
Yeah,
these two areas? Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I would say that, there's like various things. I think there's like, in life, I always feel like, which is probably why we're living in the upset world that we are today. There's like a lot of othering. We do all of this othering and stuff, right? This is the West, this is the East, this is like a startup, this is like a corporate or a big tech. We have a lot of this sort of stuff. This is a senior person, this is a young person. And the real truth is intrinsically, there's a lot of stuff that people have in common. We're all human and we all live across the planet. And therefore, at some point, something has to overlap. It's physically impossible that there are X number of things that do not overlap in society. And so I think, like, one of the biggest things that I would say is that when you're developing globally, the tendency is to think that, okay, if I'm developing something like a Google, like how's it really different from here? To be really honest, I probably learned like a hell of a lot more at GoJek than I learned at Google. Probably Google will kill me for saying that, but it's true. Google was like GoJek was a really tough environment. It's a really tough startup environment. Was not a technology person. It's probably my first foray into tech. And they like didn't really, they just like threw you in there and like figure it out, and it was really tough for me, but I learned a lot because I was forced to figure it out. I was like, if I want this job and I want to have a job, I better the hell figure this out. And so I really had to struggle in a way. And that's where I developed like a lot of, like how should I build up a team? How should I approach products, the creative problem solving? It was a lot of experiments to try and figure out how to do things. And I probably took a lot of that learning and I took it to Google because in a place like Google, there are less people who have that experience and that exposure. There's enough startup people, but sometimes people are not as used to it. So I ended up at Google um, in a lot of 0 to 1 products and a lot of 0 to 1 product teams. I ended up being put on teams where maybe the acqui-hired a startup because they felt that, because it felt like since I had been in a startup environment, that would be good. And then it's a good bridging the gap kind of an exercise. And so, so I would say like, there's enough stuff there that like actually like I learned that I put back there to overlap. So I tried to put in some of those more like interesting creative ways of doing things or like workarounds or experimenting. I tried to do that a lot more my teams there. So that mindset probably came from a lot more of these things. I think the other thing is like in Asia, you get very, very good at like, like there's not the budgets here aren't as big. And so, as I said, like being a lot more frugal or being a lot more, people are a lot more hardcore about measurement over here. I think that's a gift. Sometimes when you work at places like a Google or whatever else it is, you can get away a little bit if something is not like showing results immediately, like now less so, but like you can get away with a little bit more time or it takes a lot more to sunset a product. Whereas in a place like GoJek, they'll be like, this sucks, bye. You know what I mean? Like they're very like people are just like, I don't have money to waste. They don't have the deep pockets that Google does, obviously, right? And at that time they were like in their highest growth phase. They hadn't IPO'd. They don't have money to just, play around with so much. So I think those kinds of things actually like you take back there. On the other side, like Google's very good at systematic sort of thinking and things like it, I was definitely like not able to structure my stuff as well. And Google really taught you to be incredibly I would say that they actually taught you to be entirely frugal with your language, with the way that you put out your reports, with like the way that you track everything and have a very systematic and systemic way of doing things. And the idea being that, hey, you can have great ideas but you need to know how to structure that in order to sell it and for somebody to like be able to actually absorb it and understand it, And so it was really good at sort of teaching those sort of aspects and understanding those things of scale, right? Like when you're looking at something, you're looking at 5 cities around the world. Like, so for example, even with Google, it's like, I have a globe, but I can't just be like, do everything for everybody. So it taught you very well about prioritization. How do you, and then it was like very data driven. It's like, we're going to look at a bunch of data and decide who are the top 5 cities. Why are they the top 5 cities? Why are these 5 cities going to represent, let's say, these other 5 things? And then we go from that. you know? So it taught me a lot more about how do you even do something across the scale of the planet and like in a really smart way. So I think that, there are definitely like different lessons to learn there. I think what's very different in Southeast Asia sometimes to think about too, versus like, let's say a Google. One part is Google is very well resourced. That's one part. It's got a lot of infrastructure and foundation and systems built. The reality is, like, even when we were at GoJek, like, and this is really maybe a bit different nowadays, but like, at that point in time, GoJek was one of the first big unicorns. It was an era of unicorns, like Tokopedia, GoJek, whatever else. What happens when it's an era of unicorns? And it's actually, Southeast Asia is not full of like, you go to the Valley and people have HCI degrees from the University of Michigan. They've done all sorts of things. And you ask people and they're like, we don't have those degrees. At that point, we didn't even have such degrees in Asia. So where are people going to learn this stuff? And the truth is they're going to learn it at the startup. So a lot of these unicorn startups in places like Indonesia or even over here, like your carousels, like your first pioneer movers, they're the university. If like it's like you've noticed, right? All the startups coming out came out of your Googles and your this and that. It's the same theory. They're coming out of the GoJeks and the Grabs and the this and that and the other. And the reason is because that was their university. There is no degree for them. So like understanding that sometimes in Asia, you have to actually be building the infrastructure and the foundation while you build the product, So like maybe I remember at one point MasterCard launching in Myanmar, but there was no credit cards in Myanmar. So MasterCard is launching the entire, they're on one side, they're working to actually build out the credit card infrastructural system of Myanmar with Myanmar, but using that to obviously push MasterCard to be the first credit card. And by that, telling people what the heck a credit card is, right? So there was a Japanese bank, I remember, they want to get to Myanmar, and they helped digitize all of the records in Myanmar to selfishly be able to bank, but that's where I think like Asia is an interesting exercise because it really is an opportunity. Often, like I think that we forget that in these much more developed sort of markets is that you have to sometimes build the system while you build a product. And I definitely took some of that to the next billion users unit and some of the things that I did at Google too. So I think like, yeah, that's where like I say there are those kinds of like differences between them. Yeah.
I think thank you for, like talking up Asia and that Asia is still a really great training ground for all
for
product
sure.
professionals.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing that. And I'm just also wondering, that sounds really great for building zero to one products, which is also like quite a number of things that you did in Google was that. But what about scaling? I mean, I know you had the privilege of working at GoJek, and of course they had that scaling ambition, which is where they expanded to Singapore and some other countries. How does Silicon Valley think about scaling, and how did Google think about scaling? And I was just kind of like curious about, after 0 to 1, 1 to 1,000, 1 to more. How does Google think about it?
I think that, when you work in it's like a twofold kind of an exercise. I think when you work in a place that already has a billion users and whatever else, the reality is it's very hard to incrementally blow up overnight, right? Like the economies of scale change a little bit at that stage. So it's both it's a double-edged sword. So at a Google, it's really hard to show mass sudden impact in certain ways because it's like, you know what I mean? Like unless you develop something brand new, it's like a notebook LM taking off or doing whatever, But on the other side of it, that's also really tough because what happens is their idea of like a baseline of what you need to hit to show that you were successful is like a very high baseline. That's really tough, because they're like, if you show something Google, they're like, that's a piddly amount. It's not enough, like, so whereas like for a startup, it'd be like, I would love that amount, So I think like this is where, it can be, it's like two ways sort of. It's like the chances are you're going to be incremental, but if you're too incremental, you're not seen as like having succeeded in like 1 or 2 years and you're going to be sunsetted. So I think it's really hard. So Google like doesn't give you, in a weird way, it can take time for things to be shut down. In another weird way, it kind of doesn't always give you the opportunity and the time that you need considering what it expects very quickly. So, there is that aspect. I think that, in terms of scaling, I think like, I would actually say like the scale, I did a lot more mass scaling, I would argue at GoJek, like mass scaling that really like saw great impact is where you is in unicorns like that are at high growth
So
phases.
yeah, I would love to double down on that and really ask you about your time at Gojek because it's not just that you joined recently, but you joined at a, if I understand from what you shared just now, pre-IPO. They
Yeah.
were scaling very aggressively.
Hmm.
They were competing with Grab. I think Uber
Hmm.
was still in the
Yes,
picture.
they were. Yeah.
Everyone was like founder led. Like
Yeah.
Travis was still in Uber.
Correct.
So it was like, yeah, like the winner takes all, right? So
Mm.
Gojek has to bring their A game into this mix. So knowing that, I'm just wondering, it scaled to the entire Indonesia, one of the biggest markets in the world.
Hmm.
What do you think was the secret? Like what was it that made it work and
Mm.
that made it like took off? Because I'm sure they weren't just the only one targeting ride sharing. I mean, Bluebird is there. They're also putting in money, and there's probably a couple other guys who are trying ride sharing in Indonesia. Like, what made it took off? What's so special about Gojek?
I think it was like first mover advantage, like I think, when Nadeem started out, and Mikey, like when they started out GoJek, like they were one of the things is like I think it's a culture of experimentation. I think like this is where things are like really sort of that's really tough, like to do startup wise, but it's like, what is the bare minimum you need to actually start? Like GoJek will tell you that when it first started and it had an app, the app was a fake front. Actually, when you press something on the app, some person was picking up the phone, calling a driver, and matching the thing up because they were just like, is this even a product that's going to work? Like, does anyone even want this product? Are people going to use an app to order an OJEC? And then, when they rebuilt the app and it was like when they kind of actually when rideshare started to take off all over the world from your Ubers to whatever, like GoJek really blew up and actually the app crashed. And they had to, and at that point, Sequoia had invested and they actually had to bring in a team to actually help kind of rebuild parts of the app to get it to like work properly, be able to like take that level of that load or whatever else. But that's actually how GoJek kind of started. When you hear all those stories, right? Like that's how a Virgin, like Virgin Records started out that like or HMV or whatever started out like the back of a boot or like, something else started like, like books being sold out of a trunk of a car for Amazon or whatever you want to call it. Like, there's like that proof of concept kind of idea. Like someone's just trying it and they're doing it in the really basic scrummy way possible. And then they're like, scaling it from there. So I don't think that left that culture of experimentation and doing something like a scrappy kind of a way just to road test it and then rolling it out. So I think like,
Mm,
I think that's one of the reasons that scaled. I think that, that's the startup advantage. The reality is like,
yeah,
if you're a startup, you have the ability to do something like that because people will forgive you if you screw up to a certain level. If you're a Google, you can't do that because you will be all over the papers if you do stuff like that, right? So like there's that other side when you get to that stage, it's almost like you have to, everyone's like, I want to be scrappy and whatever, but there's a truth. You can't be as scrappy without some guardrails put in because you'll be punished for it. But while you're
yeah,
a startup, you should see that as the advantage. And that's why I would say like, GoJek did scale because they were okay to like try all these, they're
yeah,
okay to just try an experiment and toss it if it doesn't work. And WeChat was the same. Like WeChat, if you read the articles about it, a lot of the stuff that you see on WeChat were features that were rolled out to their employees for something or the other. Like the red packet thing was actually their way of solving the problem of them standing in line for hours to get notes to give red packets to their own employees. And then everyone's like, this is a great idea. Why don't we just like scale that? And they did. And then that created a way for them to set it. And then they were like, oh, we'll force people to open an account to do that. You see? So you could see how that stuff blows up. Insurance on WeChat or cars being sold on WeChat. WeChat will tell you like I think I read an article. You know how they started insurance on WeChat? The same thing. They put a button and they just saw how many people click it. There's no insurance to buy. They just were like, how many people will click this button? When everyone clicked the button, they're like, let's sell insurance. So it's like that kind of ability to scale, I think comes a little bit about from like a level of like experimentation and knowing where you sit, obviously, on that kind of spectrum. I think the other thing with
yeah,
economies of scale is again like understanding human kind of behaviors. Like, in GoJek, there was a lot of work that was done. So like GoJek's not a rideshare app, right? It's a super app with lots of verticals to it. Why would you do that? You would do that because again, that's the best way to grow and scale. Acquiring a user costs a lot of money. Taking a user and transferring them to the next bit of your product or another vertical, way less money. So it's in your advantage to like upsell them to your food delivery, to this, to that, the other. And then again, it's the economies of scale. Rideshare, you're always discounting and vouchering and doing whatever. And finally, Grab is like, actually making the dollars. But we all know it's like most people are losing money. It took a long time to get to profit, right? And the reality is, though, food delivery is actually a lot more tenable because, like, it's easier to take a bag of food in a car than a human being. And it's faster and kind of a little bit more efficient in certain ways. And so like, you can add on all sorts of charges for it. So a lot of times, like the apps that use food delivery and have rideshare, actually the food delivery is subsidizing some of the loss on the rideshare, to be really honest, and maximizing that ride, or whatever else you want to call it. So, there's also that sort of aspect. And then you can figure out how you cross-sell. You can, you find out people's behavior and habits from the data and figure out where they're more likely to take on a service or when, or what's the price point, or whatever else. And I think like you use data to really drive those kinds of decisions, I would say. So I think like that's why
Yeah.
GoJek scale well, is they were very good at using their data to figure out these things. Like how long does it take till somebody is sticky and like uses your ride? I'm going to voucher till they actually do many of those, or like, what are the places I should like cross sell and not sell? And they did that through data. They were very good at data crunching and figuring that stuff out.
Yeah. Really, really love that. And what I'm taking away is like this culture of experimentation. And I'm just going to also ask you, I think at the time Gojek was already hiring thousands of employees, or what was the staff strength?
Yeah, I think it had just started hiring a
Definitely,
decent. Yeah, it was like very high growth. So
definitely
it
more than
definitely
a
was, yeah.
thousand.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was definitely
definitely
like
more than a
growing
thousand.
rapidly. Yeah.
How do you maintain a culture of experimentation with more than 1,000 people? That's what I
Yeah.
really want to find out. And yeah, what did you observe about that?
I think I
Which you
was
highlighted as important.
still there at an okay phase, to be really honest. Like even though it was high growth and it was growing, I think it blew up a decent amount when I was there. I think I heard it blew up even more when I left. So I probably maybe wasn't even there at the highest amount of hiring. Like I'd say it was the highest growth in terms of like the product and the this and the numbers and the whatever, and to some level employees. And I think after me, those even number of employees probably scaled up more. Um, I think like there is a reality check too, right? Like, I think a culture of experimentation, like even at places like Google and whatever, you have some of that, but obviously they're kind of in pockets. I think that a lot of it has to do, which I know that people struggle with in different places too, and even here, like there has to be a culture of failure to have a culture of experimentation. Failure is very hard to do in Asia. It's not like in our DNA to fail. We're not taught to do things like that. But it's also the fact that like the word failure is associated with it. Actually, it's not failure. What it is, it's a data point that tells you whether something works or not, and if components of something works or not, and you can take that data into your next experiment. So I think like it's the fact that we say that it's a failure, but actually what it is, it's a growth point, it's a pivot point, it's a learning point. You could reframe all of that. But it's necessary to do that because that's actually where you learn. If everything is perfect all the time, it is physically impossible to learn anything. There's a reality. If you live in utopia, what are you learning? Like the fact that the reason that there's so many products and startups in the world is, I mean, maybe because our world is so messed up. I don't know. You know what I mean? So there's lots of problems to solve, So there's a little bit of that. There's the idea like to look for the problems. Like, a lot of times I think people even say like in Singapore, oh, like, people don't know how to solve problems because we don't really have any problems. I would argue that's like impossible. There's a lot of problems here to solve. It's just a question of do you want to solve them? And then I think the other part is when you solve a problem, like what problem are you solving? Like are you solving like some little niggly whatever thing, or are you solving some intrinsic human problem and therefore you can scale it? So maybe I find the solution in Singapore, but because it's a fundamental problem for, let's say, senior citizens or the economically sort of like challenged or whatever you want to call it, therefore I can find that market somewhere else in the world. And now I have economies of scale. So I think it's really about like getting to the crux of like, what you are like actually solving for. And I think like reframing the way that you do things as experiments. Like, like I'm willing to say that I'm gonna run X number of experiments and then maybe I actually like, that develops
Mm,
itself into like a product. I think very
yeah.
often we're so there's a lot of a perfectionist kind of a mindset that, you start out and you're like, if you like, and there's also, I think, like this, where we live in a really tough era where I think like the thing nowadays is that, everything becomes, I have to be like a Forbes 30 under 30. I have to make it to TechCrunch. I have to do whatever. So you're starting out with this premise that I have to have a great product that wins. But most of the people that have great products didn't start out with that mindset. They start out with a mindset of like, I'm just going to try this out. Even at GoJek, I would say that, it's really funny because I used to laugh at some point where Nadeem would like have these like interviews. He's like, and maybe we won't be here tomorrow. And that's actually how they function. The reason they kept on trying, I think, to do whatever and kept experimenting is because of like, maybe the Indonesian government would just shut us down tomorrow. And every day was like, maybe we won't be here tomorrow. Even like 2 years in, they're like, maybe we won't be here tomorrow. And I think that that has its own thing. At some point, you have to build for the long term along with the short term and can't always be that, but that's probably what allowed for a culture of experimentation because it was like, whatever, man, this could all go up in flames tomorrow, right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Love that impermanence, right?
yeah,
Really, really interesting. And maybe you're right. Maybe in the valley they just have this, bigger appetite for failure, and that's just more propensity for failure because more people are trying new things all the time, and because of that, they're actually maybe pivoting and getting closer to the right thing to build.
I
In
think it's
this
also
case.
like the stretch of it, right? Like, I mean, I'm not an expert as much anymore, but if I
Mm,
hear criticisms from VCs or others of startups here or whatever else it is, a lot of times I meet somebody and they're like, yeah, and like, you'll be like, okay, so where do you want to take this product? They're like, oh, like just Singapore. And you're like, why would you do that? Like, you're going to go and ask a VC for $1 million, but your idea is to not go beyond Singapore. Like the VC is going to fund you for Singapore. They're not going to fund you for anything. They're going to be like, oh, that's the end of my funding. Bye. So it's sort of like, thinking beyond like your means, going out there, traveling, having like a bigger picture kind of thing in mind of where this could go like down the line. I also think it's about like you have to put yourself in that sort of, it's really tough, but I think you have to put yourself in that mindset of that it counts, right? Like they say that nowadays you won't find the Ubers and the Airbnbs of the world, partly because like no one is growing up like that anymore, right? That like the Airbnb guys couch surfed and slept on people's couches. They were like their thing was like failing. Like, Kalanick, like his first thing like failed, and then he started to do these like meetups in his place, and like that led to something else. It's like, like that's how the whole Uber thing kind of started. So I think it's also this sort of it's good that we have a great startup ecosystem here with lots of grants and support and different things, but it's a little bit like Google and the free baristas, right? It's like if you're too comfortable, you won't push yourself hard enough to do the experiment or to get out of your comfort zone. Like it's to a certain extent, like if you're like, if you're the person with a startup that's like, I basically put all my savings into this and I have no money, you're probably going to make it work because you have no money and you need some. So it's like, setting yourself up in an environment where you're not like too comfortable. Otherwise, you're probably not going to push yourself you're not going to stretch yourself and give yourself stretch goals to the level that you're actually capable. You're going to give it to yourself within like the limits of what you think is your stretch goal.
yeah, I love that. And if we have several minutes just to close off this
Yeah, sure.
conversation, talking about stretching
Mhm.
yourself, having stretch goals for our own personal careers, I think a lot of us are very interested to maybe one day work in the United States.
Mhm.
Maybe after Trump era, we don't know for some of us. But just wondering, like, how did you manage to land something in the United States? Was there like a special pass for Singaporeans? Yeah, like is
Yeah.
there like a secret hack or something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, like I mean, you can get it like working in the US is much easier for Singaporean than anyone else. You can get an H-1B1. It's a special category visa. You don't have to go into the H-1B pool. So you can even go there for a year or two. You know what I mean? It's like an easy passport. It's easy to usually get. I don't know if it's easy to get now with Trump, obviously, but usually it's pretty easy to get. And H-1B1 is interesting. You just have to get a job. The job has to sponsor you, obviously. But the difference is it's not like got the thing of H-1B where you have to apply at a certain time of the year. There's a quota and a lottery. You have to make it into that lottery and then you have to move in October. You can apply all year round for the H-1B one. As long as your company gets the paperwork together and submits it, it's $200 to $300. It doesn't cost anything. You go in, you submit your paperwork. It's a 15-minute interview and you get your passport back in a week and you're off.
Wow.
It's like a 2 to 3 month process. So there's no excuse if you want to try it out. You don't have to go make your whole
Mm,
life there if you don't want to move. You could just go there for a year or two and come back. So that's very
yeah.
doable. So that's why I did look at it, because I felt like I knew there was a special category visa and I didn't have to go through H-1B, which I think it makes it easier for that first step and makes it much more hireable for a company. It's less paperwork and less
Yeah,
cash and worry and all this H-1B stuff. The second part is how do
100%.
yeah. The other part is like, it depends what you do. I will be very honest with you. I did not, most people think like I started here and Google transferred me all this stuff. I actually didn't do that. I was at GoJek. My time at GoJek I felt was coming to a close. We had like a mutual conversation. And at the time I did want to go to I actually wanted to go to the Valley before I went to GoJek. And then GoJek came up and I decided to just do it because I thought I could see like that it was going to be special and kind of do like it was a really good moment for it. And I'd learn a lot, obviously. So actually what I did is like everyone told me there's a basic aspect of it. Like, so I worked at GoJek. So what is the most obvious place I should apply at Lyft and Uber? Right? There's a highest chance. You want to just increase your chances and you want places that are probably going to be able to sponsor your visa. So you have to go a little bit. Doesn't mean startups can't, but I just over-indexed on those. I think Y Combinator startups are good to look at too, because they have apparently, because they're so used to they have international lawyers that are so used to doing visas and this and that. So those startups are really savvy and most of them are international founders anyway. So that's another path if you want the startup path too. There's several others obviously too. But I went there for my final interview. I got to the last interview. I went for my final interview for Lyft and I didn't get it. And so there I was in the US and I had a choice. I could have just come back and I thought, well, I'm here. I'm on a visa. I might as well try. And what I did is I credit to everybody because it's never on your own. I tapped everybody I knew and I said, I need to have coffees with people. So I went out and I had several coffees. And honestly, that's what I did. I was there for 2.5 months of my 3-month ESTA visa. And I was like, I'm screwed. Nothing is happening. I'm probably just going to have to like, hide my tail and go back home. And then I was like, oh, and I kept going. And I read this great article that said the Valley is weird, where you just need one person to say yes. And then somehow it's some ripple effect because all the recruiters talk to each other, do whatever, and things will work out. And that's what happened. I hustled and I hustled and I had coffees. I had 9 coffees with Google, 9 with NBU before anything came out of it. I had 3 coffees with 3 different people at Facebook. I had 3 coffees. I actually applied at Airbnb over here, thanks to Karan Mehta, who used to be the head over here of Airbnb. He actually referred me in. And I applied in Lyft and Airbnb in November, and I didn't get anything for 6 months. I didn't hear from them. And this was then I heard while I was in the US, right? So, and that's literally it. I just kept going and having coffees and hustling and meeting people. And in the end, I interviewed with Facebook, Airbnb, and Google, and I got all 3 jobs actually. And then and for the first time in my life, then it was new to me. Everyone's like, you have to negotiate. I'm like, I don't know how to negotiate. And I went to Google and, I told them, I was like, I don't really want to negotiate. If you just give me this salary and the job, I'll just take your job. But they didn't play ball. Of course, they were Google. They're like, whatever, I don't care. And so then that's what I learned. I pitted them all against each other and negotiated very hard. And then I just picked the job I wanted, and it was hard. It's not all of those things were new to me. I was not used to doing those things. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to risk my job by making them negotiate against each other. But yeah, so it is it is to tell you that these things are possible. And, I had a good career here. I could have just stayed here and gone from GoJek to Grab or somewhere else or a great company or do whatever. But I started all over again in the US, no one knew me. I had no background over there. And yeah, even when I got the Google job, I have to admit, I was told I could go to Bangalore. So here's a funny one. Google offered me the job actually in Bangalore. And they wanted me to start a team. Then I said but I came to get a job in the US. And I said, I have an offer already from these 2. So why would I take this? And now you imagine the salary difference between a Bangalore job and a US job. And to credit to them, the NBU team pushed and got me the job in the US, which is probably a 5 times bigger salary and whatever. And, and they actually bothered to do it. And I was even told that they had actually interviewed a bunch of people and I was the last in the round. They shoved me in last minute. So I could have not even gotten to the job in time. There's so many factors to it. But that's what I mean. You just have to, I really believe you just have to go out and hustle. It was a risk. And even then I could have interviewed in Singapore or India. And I'm not saying they're easier, but usually the processes are a little bit nicer, I think, on this side of the world. And I was like, no, I want to know that I can get a job at Google in Silicon Valley and that I can measure up to everybody. So I chose to do the Google interviews in the US and not come back here and do them. And I was like, that meant maybe I won't get the job. But I was like, whatever. I want to be able to walk in and when everyone asks me, I'm going to be like, I got the job the same way you did. So I'm just as good as you.
That's so much to learn here, and I really love your spirit. That's a bit of a entrepreneurial fire and spark in you, and bringing all that resourcefulness as well. I'm really excited to see what you will bring to your next gig. And if I'll also be kind to offer you like a minute or two. Tell us what are you going to work on next? Because I know the job at GovTech didn't work out for you. So yeah, what are you moving towards to? What's something ideal that you want to work on?
Sure. I actually did get into like another team at GovTech, so I'm working with them at the moment. Yeah, so I am still there. I'm just on a different team. But yeah, like in terms of what do I want to do, I guess like I'm figuring out still like the team and the products that I'm on at the moment. So that's one part. I think in terms of other aspects, I would just say that, I guess I'm still figuring out some of those things. I'm thinking of like, I think eventually I would probably, if I look well into the future, I would probably love to sort of be in more fractional roles where I'm like working with startups or like, working with some different companies maybe. Because I think that's a great way to learn. And then side hustle wise, I think it's important to like have a creative side, which I haven't done in a really long time. You learn that after a while in tech. You start talking like GPT all the time. So you need to go read books to figure out how to read and write and talk properly again. So yeah, I'm actually working on well, I've been doing this for a bit, but I need to buckle down. I'm working on an animation script because I had this privilege during the time that I had like off of work, sort of like last year. And I met an ex-Pixar animator who happened to be giving a talk over here. And now I'm like writing a script with him, which is completely new to me. And I have no idea what I'm doing. And he's teaching me, which is an amazing gift. So yeah, I really actually would like to try another side to my career that I have no experience in whatsoever.
Yeah, I love that. And you're a classic example of someone who've made multiple career switches. I remember when I met you, you were actually in market research. And
Yeah.
I believe for a period of time you were an advertising
Yeah, I was a
copywriter.
copywriter. I started my life out as a copywriter,
Yeah,
doing
because I
ads and
saw you,
commercials.
I remember seeing you on TV where they had this like, recall episode
Yes,
and,
I
and
did an
all that.
M1 ad in an Indian curry house, and it was on the SG60 nostalgia kind of like. It turns out like
Yeah.
people liked it, which was super cool.
Yeah.
But
So
to be honest, like that comes from research too, right? Like I was like, what, it was very much, we didn't win any ad awards really. We won Viewers' Choice Awards and like People Awards, like people actually liked it. So I think
yeah,
like it just goes to show you that there's a thread through all of that, right? Like the truth is like if
yeah.
you understand people, whatever the product or the job is, that's the key, right? To developing something properly.
Awesome. And I think there are several people who would like to connect with you after
Sure.
our chat over here. What's the best way they can reach out to you?
Sure, you can like, you can ping me on my LinkedIn. Obviously, that works perfectly well, and I do check it. If not, like you're really welcome to email me at I'm just gonna read it out, I guess, like Hirebet at gmail.com. I'm fine with that. You can absolutely email
All
me.
right.
It's fine.
So yeah, since it's read out, I'm sure you guys can catch it or just kind of rewind it here on the podcast. Tara, it's been a pleasure kind of
Thank
spending
you.
time with you, learning about your work, and really just believe it or not, I think what you shared today is also making me rethink how I think about my business,
Oh, cool.
and the scale of things, right? So it's really, really exciting. And we look forward, yeah, to having you in some capacity in future in
Sure. I'd
whatever
love that.
classes or lessons and stuff like that.
I'd love
And
that.
for those of you who are listening in, we hope to see you for our next session. We got quite an exciting lineup in the next at least two sessions. I think we have confirmed our speakers. So Tara, thank you so much for being on the
Thank
show.
you. And thank you all for like dialing at this time and like listening in, especially being from like all over the world. I feel like, I definitely think like,
Yeah.
I feel very privileged and I really, really appreciate like you kindly coming. So thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for
Hey,
attending.
And thank you,
Tara.
Dalen,
Uh,
as well for having me.